there is nothing like feeling that freedom of not being encumbered by anything, and just like, I forget I can't see when I'm walking around with her because I feel like I'm walking around like a sighted person.
Hi everyone, it's Carrie from Live Accessible, and today I'm so excited to have Joy Hugh on the channel, and she is a blind YouTuber. Hi Joy, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So tell us
Amazing.
a little bit about yourself and your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I am 24 years old, about to be 25, which I feel like I'm having like a little bit of a quarter life crisis about that. But I am totally blind. I am actually in seminary right now studying counseling, and I am about to graduate in May, which is really crazy. My background is actually in speech and language pathology. That's what I studied in undergrad. And I originally started my YouTube channel back in 2016 to document my journey getting my guide dog. So during that time, I was just trying to find resources and experiences of people who had been through that experience, and I found nothing. And so I fully intended on doing YouTube just for like the month that I was in training and stopping. And now it's been almost 5 years and I never stopped. So yeah, that's kind of how my channel came about.
I love that. So first it just started with you getting your guide dog. How did that go, by the way?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. It was good. It was a hard experience, but a really good one. I loved my class experience. My friends that I met in class are some of my best friends, and we still talk like all the time. But it also was really hard, and I think, people don't go into the details of how hard it is. Like, I came home and I felt like I became a mother in some ways because I had this little creature that was dependent on me and was like attached to me, and I couldn't leave her alone, and I had to keep my eye, quote unquote, on her like every single second of the day. And so yeah, it was a big transition, but she's doing really well, actually. She was really sick over the summer, but she's been really healthy and just hanging in there through quarantine. It's been tricky for her not to get as much work, but she's a trooper, so she's doing well.
yeah, I've heard that some of the guide dogs, especially during quarantine, are having a hard time. And I want to come back to that, but
Yeah.
I want to ask you first, what made you continue doing videos after you finished your guide dog training?
Yeah, well, so honestly, first it was just that I felt like, so first I saw kind of a hole in firsthand experiences of guide dog training, which now in 2021, there are so many people who've documented their experiences getting their guide dogs, which I think is so great because, like, you can read about what it's like to get a guide dog, but like to hear experiences firsthand is amazing. So I saw that hole, and then I also saw that there was no one really documenting like the transition of becoming a guide dog user, because it doesn't just end. Like, you don't get your dog and everything is just like sunshine and rainbows. It's really hard for a good 6 months. I don't think I felt confident with my dog for the first year. And it was a really, really hard transition for me. And so, yeah, so it ended up just being me thinking, okay, I need to continue talking about this because no one is talking about it. And then it was like, well, I'm also a college student and I'm also in a really visual field. And, like, I felt like I just had a lot to say. And I'd had so many conversations with friends from college about just like frustrating things that happened, or people who would grab me, or people who would, just do ridiculous things. And I just felt like I already started talking about blindness because I've been talking about my guide dog. I've been talking about my experience transitioning home and being a guide dog user and going to school with a guide dog and dealing with all of those things. I might as well just keep talking about my experiences because I feel like I have a lot more to say. So, and I still talk now 5 years later. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I love watching your videos and just hearing your opinions. Like I always say, not all blind people think the same, so we're not all the
Yeah.
same. We don't have the same opinions. So
Yeah.
it's something that, people kind of stereotype us,
Yes.
but we definitely have like different ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about like what it is like having a guide dog because I'm not a guide dog user. I'm a cane user and
Yeah.
my husband and I are both cane users. My dad had a
Totally.
guide dog, but that's when I was younger and so
Sure.
I didn't really pay attention.
Yeah. 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 Well, like I said, it is not easy. I think a lot of the times people think a guide dog is just going to make your life so much easier. And in some ways it does. And I love that feeling of being able to just literally run down the sidewalk and she's weaving me through obstacles and she'll take me straight to the door. And like, there's just this like fluidity and agility that you can have with a guide dog that you just can't have with a cane. I've always been a fast walker and I
Mhm.
was so frustrated that my cane would get stuck on everything and like stab you in the stomach. And it's
So
just like,
true.
oh gosh. So so that's great, but it's also really hard. When I went back to college after I got my dog, I'd had her for about barely 3 months. I don't even think it was 2.5, 3 months. And for the first 3 weeks of class, I fell every
Oh my
day, walking to
goodness.
campus, walking to the bus stop to go to the campus. We were just in an area with very cracked, just not very old, not good sidewalks. And I fell every single day. And I think it was because she was adjusting and then I was
Mhm.
adjusting, even just like carrying a big backpack, working a dog, like it kind of messed with my sense of balance. And yeah, I literally like it was terrible. Like I would go to class with blood dripping down my leg, and my friends would be like, "What happened to you?" I'm like, "I don't want to talk about it." Um, but yeah, it's hard work, and I love having a guide dog, and she has been with me for almost 5 years now. She walked with me through my graduation from undergrad. She's about to walk with me through my second graduation with my master's, and just such a great companion. And yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, has really, really enhanced my life and my independence. But it's also been a lot of hard work. And I think I made a video about this recently about how it's like having a child. Like she has to be number one all the time. And even when I'm trying to finish a paper, I have to take breaks and play with her and give her affection and attention because she needs that. Um,
And I'll link that video right in
oh,
the
great,
cards for you
great.
guys.
Thank you. But yeah, it's good. I don't actually remember your original question, but that's
I know,
that's kind
just
of
like
how
telling
it is.
us
So
about, having a guide
yeah.
dog. And then I guess the transition too from
Mhm.
after the guide dog training at the actual school to
Yeah.
taking the dog with you everywhere
Yeah.
you go.
It's not an easy transition, and I think it's probably hard for more people than it's easy. And often people don't talk about the hard, and I think it's really important, just even just for people in the public, seeing if you see a team struggling. Even sometimes people are like, oh, what's wrong with the dog, what's wrong with the person? And it's just really hard. Like you just have to understand that we're a new team and we're like working out the kinks, and the best thing you can do in those situations is to offer help, and if the person doesn't want it, and then to kind of step back. Yeah, it's tricky.
So what helped you with that transition? Were there any
Mm,
strategies or techniques that you used, or did it
mm.
just you just needed practice, like working as a
Yeah,
team together? What was it?
yeah, that's a really good question. I think it was a lot of things. I was really well supported by my school. I there's was one week where I think I'd fallen literally every single day, and like she got me lost in a parking lot, and I was just like, I don't even want this dog anymore. Like, this is horrible. And I called my school like in tears, and they were like, okay, we're going to send someone out to you. Don't panic. Everything is fine. You're okay. She's, everything's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And they literally sent trainers out. My trainer who I had in class and some other trainers, and it was just amazing. And so anyway, I was really well supported by my school, but I think the big thing for me was learning how to control my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was working my dog and she would make a mistake, she would, I don't know, run me into something or cross the street diagonally or just make a mistake. I mean, she was barely 2 years old. She was still learning. Oh, it would make me so angry, and I would get so frustrated. And I found that when I reacted out of that anger and out of that frustration and like almost like carried that with me and held a grudge against her, our bond was so rough, and it was just really hard. But when I was able to take a breath and say, okay, she's not doing this to me on purpose. She's still learning. I'm still learning how to best direct her. And she's literally a baby. She just turned 2. Like, she's still learning how to do her job. And like, it's not supposed to be perfect and pretty. This is just part of the process. So when I was able to distance myself a little bit and say, okay, she's not doing this, because it can feel personal. Like, it feels, it's so silly, right? Like, it's a dog, but like, it feels so personal sometimes. The 10th time she's run you into something, you're like, oh gosh, like it feels so personal, but it's not. And to just breathe and say, okay, we're learning. And to learn how to control my emotional reactions, and to not get really angry when I wanted to get really angry, and just to say, okay, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, it kind of does sound similar to having a child, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it's totally, except children can talk back, and my
Yeah.
dog can talk back. So yeah.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
But so you've shared, the challenges of having a guide dog. What are some of the real benefits, and what
Yeah.
do you enjoy about having a guide dog?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, there is nothing like feeling that freedom of not being encumbered by anything, and just like, I forget I can't see when I'm walking around with her, because I feel like I'm walking around like a sighted person. Like, she takes me around obstacles. It's so smooth, and it's just so amazing. She finds me doors, empty seats. If I've shown her a landmark one time, she usually remembers it the next time.
Mm.
She'll like bring me to my friends. And so like, I'll literally be like, okay, where is, I don't know, somebody, and she'll usually take me to them. And so, from like a mobility standpoint, that's really helpful. But just also from like a social standpoint too, um, I just think often people think blind people are scary, and we're not, but people think we're scary. But if you have a dog that's like super cute, people are just more willing to approach you, even if they're asking questions only about your dog, which can be kind of annoying. But often those questions turn into more questions about you. And so yeah, I've met so many people just randomly on the bus or just out in public, and yeah, it's been a really sweet thing. And yeah, so I think that's probably one of the biggest things. And then the last thing I would say is just like emotional support, and just like the bond you have with a guide dog is so powerful and so intense. And like, I can't even explain how much I love my dog. Like, I don't even have words to say how much I love her. And um I've talked about this a little bit on my channel, but I went through a really, really hard season of life. I dropped out of grad school. I faced a lot of discrimination, and there were nights where, for like months, where I would just sleep on the floor with her because I needed to like feel her body against mine and to like have my hand on her chest, feeling her breathing because I was losing it. And like that was just a really, really powerful experience. And I really think like that those months that we went through together, like she totally could feel my emotions and sense my emotions. And I think our bond grew so much stronger after that happened. So
Wow, that's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
I love it. It almost makes me wanna, like, think about getting a guide
I
dog one
know.
day, but
You should. You totally should.
I don't know. I like dogs.
Yeah,
My dad had a guide dog, and
yeah,
I actually, he was a working dog,
yeah,
yes, but
yeah.
also he's part of the family. It's obvious that like my dad was the top boss, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
I was the second. Like, my
Yeah.
dad was like, "Oh, can you go take the dog out because he's
That's
doing
great.
something?" And I would be one of the ones that he'd actually really listen to.
Yeah, that's
And
great. That's
and like,
awesome.
he wasn't my guide dog, but I can definitely relate to just, just having pets that you're close to where you do pour out your emotions, and
Yeah.
they definitely can support you. I was going through my teenage years, so you
Yes.
can imagine. And then so like just
Absolutely.
that multiplied by 100 when if it's I can
Yeah.
imagine if it's your guide dog and
Yeah.
your eyes and
Yeah.
everything. So I can imagine just a little part of what that
Yeah.
would be like.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell us a little bit about your vision and what caused your blindness.
Yeah, so I have something called retinal dystrophy, which is kind of like an umbrella term to just say like your eyes are really screwed up. Yeah, so my retinas are scarred and deformed, and they were like that when I was born. And
Mm,
there's just no history at all of any sort of like visual impairment, eye disease in my family. So it was just a huge shock to my parents. Um, and so when I was born, I had about 2800 vision, so I could
mm,
see things up close. I remember when being like 3 years old and having my mom teaching me my letters, and she would write them really big and black marker on a white piece of paper, and I could see it because of the contrast. And I remember, she would write mom and what she would write my name, and I remember that. And then at the age of 4, I had a huge internal bleed in my left eye. And then a few months later, my right eye also had an internal bleed. So it led to 6 months of a lot of surgeries and ended up with a double vitrectomy, which is where they take your
mm.
vitreous out of your eyes. And
Okay.
yeah, it was kind of a crazy time. But yeah, so I ended up losing that 2800 vision, and now I have just a little bit of light perception in my left eye. So I I usually just say I'm totally blind because it's easier than saying I can see a little bit of light in my left eye, but only in this circumstance, and it's just too complicated. So um,
Yeah, I
yeah, so that
understand that. I just say
yes,
that
well
I'm blind
even
too, even though
yeah,
I
even
still
more
have
so for
2800
you.
vision,
Yeah,
It's just
yeah,
because when you say something like, "Oh, I'm legally blind or visually impaired,"
yeah,
depending on the place, they just don't understand and like,
yeah,
"What? What does
yeah.
that mean?"
Yeah. Well, and I have a friend who she always tells people I have an or what does she say? She says, I have too little vision to help me and a little too much that gets me into trouble. Because it's
I
on
love
that
that.
fuzzy line of like I can see and sometimes it's helpful, but sometimes it's really not. And so I feel grateful honestly that my vision is just pretty black and white. Like I just can't see really anything at all. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot
Yeah.
easier because, in some ways, because, like, for me, people ask, "Oh, what's your vision like?" And that's such a hard
That's such a
question.
hard question. It's like depending on the day, I'm sure, or depending on the lighting or
Mhm,
the
exactly.
yeah.
And sometimes even depending on the doctor, it'll be a different
Yeah.
my goodness. Yeah. So you're going to school right now, and could you tell us a little bit about, your experience being a blind student?
Yeah. I I feel like I've actually had kind of a wide range of experiences. Like I said, my undergrad was in speech and language pathology, which is a very visual field. And my disabilities office was really, really great, supported me so well through that. And like they learned how to transcribe things into Braille, and I had to learn Braille phonetics, and they helped me with all of that. And I took like 3 neuroanatomy classes, and they did 3D printouts and like raised line drawings and all these things. So I was super well supported throughout my undergrad. And then I went to grad school for speech, and it was at the same school, and I was still very well supported by the disabilities office, but the the department and just the field itself was so honestly like impossible for a blind person to break into. It was just, I mean, so discriminatory. There's so many things that I was asked to do that I couldn't do. And I was told I couldn't give therapy unless I had a sighted person in the room, like just all these things that were really, really hard. And during that time, I know you didn't ask me this, but during that time, I felt I I had a burden and like a responsibility to trailblaze, because there's not another blind speech and language pathologist in my position. Like, I think there were people who were SLPs who became blind after they got their certificate of competencies, or there are people who had some residual vision, but I was the first totally blind person to go through that process.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I had a responsibility to continue and to press on for like the good of the blind community. And that was a really heavy burden on me, and like honestly why I pressed on for as long as I did, even though my mental health was just deteriorating. So anyway, I ended up dropping out of grad school after a few months, because it was just horrible. And so that was honestly a terrible experience. I have a very, very long, lengthy video about my whole story on that, so I'm not going to go into that right now. But I ended up deciding to study counseling, which had kind of been in the back of my head for a while anyway. And just for me, my faith is really important to me. It's just really huge to just my identity and who I am and how I think about things. And so I knew I wanted to go to seminary and pursue a degree in counseling from a seminary. So here it's been amazing. It's definitely like a new adventure, because seminary is a small private, institution, so there's no disabilities office. And so I've had to be really creative with how I access materials, and it's been really good. I expected there to be a lot more bumps than there were, and it's just been really, really smooth. So I do kind of a hodgepodge of accessible PDF files that I read through an app called Voice Dream Reader.
Oh, that's a good app.
Yeah, it's great. Doing just kind of JAWS OCR reading, and then I get help from a friend to insert footnotes and things like that are kind of tricky to do with the screen reader. So yeah, it's just kind of like I feel like I'm like in a village. It takes like a village to send me through seminary, but it's been really sweet. So
Well, sometimes we just need support, whatever it is, even people, if they don't have a disability, you always need a village with you, and you need support
yes,
around you,
yes, absolutely.
It's,
Yeah,
so you mentioned that you use Braille. Is that
yeah,
right?
I do.
So did you learn as a child?
Yes. So I was taught Braille starting from when I was 3 years old. And
Huh.
I'm very passionate about Braille literacy. I think it is so important for blind children to be learning Braille and not just how to use a computer with a screen reader.
So
It is
please share,
so,
because
yeah,
I definitely agree. There
yes,
are people who don't, and that's
yes,
totally okay. But I want to hear, and I want
yeah,
you to share why you think it's important for
yeah.
kids to learn Braille. or
I
even
just,
adults?
yeah, no, everybody. It is so important to learn Braille. Well, I think, first of all, just learning like spelling is very hard to do without seeing
Hmm.
something in front of you. And you know, my background's in speech and language. We talk a lot about language acquisition, reading, literacy, and the way you learn how to read is by matching phoneme grapheme awareness. So the sound and the letter. And if you're not seeing the letters in front of you, you're not getting how to you're not really learning how to read. Um, and so it is so important for kids to be learning their letters alongside their sighted peers. That's what kids their age are doing. And it's really important for blind people to be doing what their peers are doing. And so you wouldn't just not teach a kid how to write his name. You know, you would teach him how to write his name before you would teach him how to type on a computer. And so blind children should have that same privilege. But another thing I think is that for some of us, we would probably be visual learners if we could see. I think
Hmm.
I would be a visual learner if I could see. And I totally feel like I do better when I can physically read something than when I listen to it. So even all throughout college, I took every single one of my tests in Braille. I took my GRE in Braille. I took my SAT in Braille, because for me, I can retain information better if I am physically doing something rather than listening can be just kind of a passive thing, right? Like
Hmm.
and it's, at least for me, I'm very easily distracted. So if I'm listening to something, my brain is wandering.
I
But if I'm
agree.
physically reading something, I can focus a lot better. So even now, being in seminary, I type my notes out on my Braille note taker. And I actually study my notes, reading them on my Braille display because I can learn better that way. So
Yeah, and I think
yeah,
too, part of it is anything that we can use to help us in any way, even if we put those two pieces of accessibility, assistive
yeah,
technology together, I think
yeah,
that it will just help us and it'll be, increase the accessibility in a way.
yeah,
It's like, when they, talk about teaching methods and everything.
yeah,
They want you to engage not just visually, not just listening, kinesthetically, and all of these techniques together. And
right,
like that's what I'm learning kind of now
yeah,
because I am homeschooling little
yeah,
Pablo. So, just getting everything engaged.
yeah. Well, and if you think about it, like you're stimulating more parts of your brain
Mhm.
and forming more connections in your brain. And there's research that shows that when people read Braille, that their visual cortices, is that, I think it's
I don't
cortices.
know.
I don't know either.
Whichever one.
I should know this, but yeah, your visual cortex is being stimulated because Braille is very spatial. You know, you're memorizing all these different patterns and symbols, and so yeah, even though you're touching and that's being translated in your brain, it's a very visual thing. I mean, I think it's really important if sighted kids can have access to different inputs of
Mhm.
auditory, kinesthetic, visual. Blind kids should get that in the same way as much as possible, even if it looks a little bit different. They should be able to have access to different ways of getting information in their brains, and not just forced to do auditory.
So, Joy, thanks so much for sharing all of this information and just sharing, your story. Can you tell us where people can find you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Carrie. So my channel is just Joy Hugh, and my last name is just spelled HU. Yeah, I'd love to have y'all on my channel.
Awesome. And one last question to wrap up. I ask this to everybody who comes on to do an interview. What's one piece of advice you would give to somebody who is blind or visually impaired?
I was thinking about this question earlier because Carrie had told me she was going to ask me this question. I was like, I have so many things I could say. And I think, I've watched a lot of the other interviews you've done and people have given such good advice. But I think something that is really important to me and close to my heart is leadership. And so often blind people are just put in positions where they're being dependent and reliant on others for information, for help. Not that that's a bad thing. Please don't hear that I'm saying it's bad to accept help. But for example, I never like hosted a party because in my head I was like, oh, that's just so hard. Like I can't do that. I'd rather just go to someone else's party and be a more passive person in that. And then I actually went to like a voc rehab center after I graduated from my undergrad for 4 months. I did 4 months of training and then I worked for them for 2 months over the summer. But in that setting, I was a leader for the first time in my entire life because there were a lot of students who had just lost their vision and they really like looked up to me, and not because like I'm so great, but just because I've been doing that. I've been blind for 24 years. I've been doing it a lot longer than they have. And so I felt like a leader, and I think it is so empowering to find situations where you can be a leader. And it's easier to sit back and to say, okay, I'm just going to be dependent on other people to feed me information, to take charge in this social situation, to whatever it is. But I think it is so important to stretch yourself and to make yourself uncomfortable in some of those situations and to push yourself to be in a more leadership position. So that would be my advice.
Definitely. I love it. I definitely dig that.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me onto my channel, Joy. It was such a pleasure to talk to you live instead of just watching your videos.
Yes.
Definitely, everybody, go check her videos out. They're awesome. If you want to subscribe to her channel, you can click right here and subscribe to Live Accessible for more of these interviews, which are every other every other Sunday. Click right here. And there's some more videos on the other side for you guys to watch. Thank you so much, Joy.